Hey fam, welcome to the Freetrail Podcast and our new presenting sponsor. We're so happy to now be working with The Feed. Thefeed.com/Freetrail is where you need to go. It is the one-stop shop for all your training and racing nutrition needs. They have over 200 of the world's best nutrition brands stocked in one website. It's a fantastic resource. We've been big customers for a long time. We're really proud to work with them. Some of my favorite products that you can find at thefeed.com/Freetrail. Gnarly Nutrition Whey Protein Powder. I like the chocolate flavor. I have some of this after every one of my workouts and long runs. For in-run nutrition, Orange Drank. You'll see my big dumb face on it. Also from Gnarly Nutrition, enhanced sodium concentration here in the world's best fueling drink mix. Finally, HVMN, Ketone IQ. I have 2 of these ketone shots basically every single day, once before I go running and once in the middle of the afternoon when I need a little extra energy. Go to thefeed.com/Freetrail and you're going to get an $80 credit, free money to spend at thefeed.com. It'll be $20 right away and then $20 every 90 days thereafter. You'll also get a sweet Trail Running Will Save the World water bottle. Again, that's thefeed.com/Freetrail. You'll get $80 credit to spend on your favorite nutrition products. And if you are international, they do ship internationally as well. So you can take care or at least take advantage of that great offering from The Feed. Big thanks to The Feed for supporting and thank you for watching the podcast. Tom Evans, welcome back to the Freetrail Podcast from a remote location in the French Alps. Good to see you, buddy.
Dylan, it's an absolute pleasure to be back. How are you doing, my friend?
I am fantastic, having a little bit of a break in between the big pushes around Western States and Hard Rock. And now, like you, looking forward to UTMB, but obviously I will be there in a different capacity. I always love having you on the show, Tom. And since you've been here a few times, I don't need to ask you the traditional opening questions, but I figured a different fun place to start with you would be with Yngvild Kasperson, because it wasn't too long ago that I learned that you operated as Yngvild's coach. And for whatever reason, it felt perfect. Tom Evans, obviously we all know you as a champion athlete, but tell us a little bit about your coaching, how it started, where you're at with it now, and maybe specifically talk about your process with Yngvild.
Yeah. So it's a great question. I've always been incredibly interested in my own training since finding out that I was, similar to you, didn't come into trail running through running, came in it through other sports. And I've always been really interested in how to get better. And I've always been really interested in, since starting running properly, why I am doing what I am doing and what is the point in doing what I'm doing. Yes, I love running, and there are some times where I just go out, I just need to clear my head and go out for the sake of mental health. And I think that's the great thing about running. It can tick so many boxes. But for me, it's especially if I'm leading up to a race, what's the point in this? Why am I doing this? And is it, at the end of today, am I going to be one step, half a step, 1% closer to being able to achieve my best for the race? So I've always been really interested in how to get better on a personal level. And I guess as things have progressed, I thought it would be a really cool idea to try and see if I can help other people. I started coaching in 2019, fairly early on, probably just after I left the army, before I signed sort of big contracts, suggesting that I'm on massive contracts.
I know what you mean, though. Sort of like as probably thinking of it as a way to earn money while also staying within the realm of, what Precisely. You're passionate about. Mm-hmm.
And it's also a bit of a hobby that if I am really injured, it's something that you can really easily scale. I like business. I invest in quite a few different companies, mostly sports tech, but I like business. I've set up a couple of businesses, and my coaching business is one of them. So it's been really fun to do that. And so I coach a maximum of 10 athletes. For me, I want to be able to give as much as I can give and give the best possible service. So I actually had one athlete drop out, and this definitely isn't a push. I'm not taking anyone on until at least the beginning of September. Yngvild has always been heavily involved in endurance sports, and was an incredible athlete before I started working with her. And I started working with her the week after she did I think it was either CCC or OCC in 2022, where she would be the first to admit that she possibly didn't perform as well as she thought that she could have done. But she was already an incredible athlete. I have not made her an incredible athlete. I guess what I have done is, changed some structure, really implemented some periodization, given some specific workouts at the right time to trigger the right physiological responses, and get her to the race, get her to the start line feeling fresh and excited to the race, having made the mistakes of going into a race really tired, and still make those mistakes now, well, hopefully not now, made those mistakes last year. I guess like my training methodology is very similar to my methodology as an athlete. And like I work with Scott Johnson as my coach, and he has definitely helped shape the athlete and also the coach that I have become and am becoming. Like, I guess for me, instead of looking at, and actually it's not just Yngvild that I coach. Out of the other, I also have started coaching Toni McCann fairly recently, and actually Toni probably won't mind me sharing this, but I had the conversation with her the other day where we'd pretty been working together for 4 or 5 months, and she's had some great results in that time. She won Broken Arrow, and she's now preparing for CCC. And she said, I'm really worried I'm not doing that much volume. And I then come back and say, look, instead of looking at what is the maximum amount of mileage and sessions your body can tolerate, look at it as in what is the minimum amount of work you need to do to be at your best for this race. And then you see so many people you hear some people like, this person ran 120 miles with 40,000 feet of vert for 6 weeks and they had an amazing race. Sometimes that happens. The majority of the time that doesn't happen. And it's also so athlete dependent. And do you prioritize, like, your body can only tolerate a certain amount of stress. And like my view is if you're running it like a tempo effort, in my opinion, that's the equivalent of running sort of 2 to 2.5 miles easy. And if you're running it sort of 10K or VO2 effort, that's like 1 mile of that is like 3 miles equivalent of easy. So very quickly, if you're doing some real quality work and you're running, let's say in a week, you run 30 miles of really quality work, that can be the same as running 80 to 90 miles easy for like relative stress. So I've really enjoyed, and I think the nice thing about coaching is there is no golden bullet, there is no golden ticket, there is no the plan that worked for Yngvild for CCC last year, and what I think would have worked for Western States this year, but sadly there was a big hiccup in the build-up before that had nothing to do with training. She had a fairly serious car accident 3.5 weeks before Western States, and still finished top 5.
Fastest debut in Western States history, we should say.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not bad. It's definitely not what she had hoped for, and definitely not what the shape that I think she could have been in. But that's sport, that's racing, things happen. It's how you adapt to things. And
she'll be back next year. But
yeah, fingers crossed.
I don't know. To me, I don't know. I would imagine that coaching is fun and stimulating in every way that you describe. But the reason I wanted to start here is because everybody who has heard you speak on a podcast or otherwise knows you to be a very well-considered person who has a gift for articulating the why behind what you do. And that feels like the most important skill that a coach can develop, is not only to come up with the philosophy and the strategy, but then to communicate it effectively with the athletes that you're in partnership with. And it's very exciting to hear about, that.
Yeah, I think for me, some of the time, for the athletes that love being in the mountains more than anything else, a lot of the time I'm trying to convince them to spend less time in the mountains, because it especially if you're training for a OCC, a 50K or 100K, you are blunting by doing 5-6 hour runs. You are blunting the sharp end that you do need. But there's no, and I guess the nice thing is there is no one size ticks all. Like you compare two of the best female 100-milers in our sport. And yes, it's different disciplines, but I reckon I would absolutely love to hear a conversation between Camille Herron and Courtney Dauwalter about their training and their mentality, because guaranteed it looks so different. And yes, they are doing ever so slightly different sports, but it's still endurance. And
it's so true.
There's no one size fits all. What the way that Jim trained to win UTMB last year will be different to the way that Killian trained to win the year before, and is going to be different to whoever stands on the top of the podium this year. Like there's no, and you can't once, even if when you I like to think that my Western States build up honestly couldn't have gone better last year. I didn't miss a single day of training. I didn't have a single niggle for over a year. But even if I tried to replicate that for next year, for example, something would be different. Not every day is the same. So I think I think where I like to think I'm fairly good as a coach is I've got a plan, and I've got a plan for my athletes probably for like a month in advance. But it's very much written in. It's not even written in pencil. It's written in like the thinnest pencil, and gives a bit of structure and a bit of idea, knowing what I want to achieve. But it probably changes on a every other day basis, and it has to. And I think those are the best coaches that are able to adapt depending on how things are going at the time. But then also at the same time, like you can't just be a great coach on your own. You've got to have, in order to be a great coach, you've got to have a great relationship with your athletes, and that communication piece is the most important thing, I think. Yeah.
It's so interesting that you bring up Camille and Courtney, because just based on their public statements, Camille has said that she never runs over 3 hours, literally never does long runs over 3 hours, where Courtney, I think, at least in the recent Solomon video that came out about her husband, Kevin, says, hey, I know not to get worried until, it's been 5-6 hours, making it seem like that's a pretty consistent stimulus for Courtney. And obviously they're both first ballot Hall of Famers going at it in very different ways. Yeah. So let's start talking more about your own personal career here. Obviously, everybody will know you did not return to reclaim your M1 bib at Western States and opting to focus 100% on UTMB. I want to get your perspective on what happened at Western States here in a second, but maybe first start with that, because I think it will be instructive as we start to talk about calendar construction and your season leading in to UTMB, the considerations, the conversations that went into the decision to opt out of Western States this year and how you feel like that sets you up to hopefully be successful at UTMB later this month?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for it. I guess for me, I spent a lot of time away from home last year, and I wanted to spend more time at home / in Europe at the beginning of this year. My wife, who is a professional triathlete, was trying to qualify for the Paris Olympics, and very sadly ended up not being selected, and that process still hasn't finished. Sport is a cruel mistress at points, but we won't dwell too much on it now. So, for me, it's the more that I train better and I race better when I'm happy and I have everything in balance. And sometimes when I'm away for too long of a period, or I sort of just, if I try to replicate exactly what I did last year, I didn't feel like I was going to get as much out of it as I did last year, because I just had the most perfect run through. The stars aligned. I just had one of those days where I raced the race. I didn't race at a time, and it ended up being a decent time, but I did what I needed. For me, winning the race was more important than trying to run a fast time. So, and I think I then got greedy, and signed up to, or accepted my UTMB entry a week later, if that, 5 days later maybe. That ended up in, I didn't have a great day. 2, I tested positive for COVID the day after, which isn't going to help. But I rushed into it massively. And you definitely can. Like, you have a good race, it's very easy to get greedy, and to just think, that went really well, I'm a bit of a legend, let's just crack on. And sometimes it takes a big fall to put things back into perspective. So I guess sort of my decisions not to go back to Western States this year and take M1, it was really hard to do. But for me, being a European-based athlete, racing in Europe this year has been my big focus. And as a professional athlete, sometimes you've got to do what you want to do, but also you've got to do what the partners that you work with also want you to do. And I'm in a really fortunate place where I work with some amazing partners, and UTMB is probably this year a little bit more of a focus, with a huge event happening in Paris, France as we speak. And the sporting media's eyes at the moment are very much in Europe. And to be able to piggyback on the back of that. So I guess lots of considerations. Also for me, I feel that UTMB, the race itself, regardless of I don't feel like we need to talk about the politics behind the race and everything behind it. And I think I feel like we should be setting an example. But for me, it's a race. It's a route that I find absolutely incredible, and I keep wanting to go back for more. And it's also something that I don't feel like I have truly hit the nail on the head yet and executed the race that, whether I think that I'm capable of, or that I think I'm capable of, not that I know what I'm capable of, because it's a 100-mile race. You don't know what's going to happen.
And there's such a good theme in your career of finishing 3rd at CCC before you won it, then finishing
4th. I was 4th at CCC.
But okay. Okay, and then but then you were also third at Western States before you won it. You've been third at UTMB.
I think Ludo was third at CCC that year, so I don't want to steal that off him.
Yeah, you can't steal anything from Ludo, that legend.
No, definitely not.
Well, I mean, we obviously missed you, but Western States was historic in a lot of ways, and I'm sure there was some mixed emotions as you saw how the race unfolded, wondering, like what it would have been like to be mixing it up at the front end of the men's race, which was as exciting of a race at Western States that I can remember. I'm sure the fans, the global trail running community would love to hear your takeaways about the dynamic at Western States this year, takeaways about how things played out, and whether you thought it was sort of an inflection point moment like a lot of us did.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's very easy to think, oh, I know who this person is on the start list. I know all their things. And when actually you have athletes who you either not raced against, but I don't know Rod at all.
Yeah.
I could walk past him in the street. I wouldn't know who he was. And I thought that he would probably have a decent race, but I don't think many people thought that he would do what he did do. And I think for me, it encapsulated the spirit of trail running entirely from the grassroots to the professional level. Is it doesn't matter what your name is or what the name of the person that you're standing next to. At the end of the day, it's a race, and all I'm trying to do is get to the finish line as fast as I ever can. It reminded me of Zach Miller at the North Face 50 from like 2017, 2018. It was that sort of mentality where it was like, everyone else is great. That's brilliant. I respect everyone. But actually, when that shotgun goes off in Olympic Valley, I'm going to do my very, very best. And I don't think anyone was really expecting his performance. And yeah, it turned out into, the men's race and the women's races were very, very different this year. And you get some years where the women's race is more exciting to watch because it's a bit closer together, and sometimes it's the other way around. And I think it was a really cool spread this year. And yeah, I thought it was an incredible race. And it was nice to see a lot of athletes race the race that I think they can be proud of, rather than, I don't think there were many people post-race who thought, I had a really bad day. I think everyone was really happy with how they performed. So yeah, it definitely gave me a bit of FOMO, and I have already slightly planned my season next year.
I saw when we posted the golden ticket calendar, you commented in there something about how you now had plans to make for yourself for 2025. But
yeah, possibly off to New Zealand early next year.
All right, interesting. Okay. So one thing that's also been top of mind for me that I felt like you were a perfect person to ask about is, at least in my time of being racing Western States or being attached to it in some way, having been there for the last 12 years, just like the cooling strategies. Now this carbohydrate conversation is like all the rage. It's starting and with Rod Farvard, who has made it clear that he feels like that is the number one contributing factor to this massive breakthrough he's had this season. Now people are talking about super shoes. Evidently 17 out of the top 20 were wearing sort of a plated trail super shoe. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say there about cooling carbohydrates or super shoes, because to me, this feels like some of those hallmark pieces or evidence that trail running really is moving into a new era, and that not only, the talent and the training strategy, but also the heat management, the cooling, the nutrition, and the equipment are all contributing to the massive evolution that we're seeing now.
I think the first thing, it probably starts from the athlete. And I think there are a lot more athletes taking it a lot more seriously now. But then also with podcasts like with podcasts like yours and people doing YouTubes and things like that, people are getting to see like a fly on the wall of what everyone else is doing. And I think like sports tech is massively growing. And I think where we look at with trail running, like everything that we are doing now has been done in other sports. Like I take cycling, for example, because that's probably the pinnacle of endurance sport that has the most money thrown at it. The cooling strategies that you see a lot of people implementing now are what cyclists were doing 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think it's really interesting where seeing what some people are doing. And I take heat training, for example. There are some people and there are some coaches who swear by going in the sauna in the build up to a hot race. There is also a lot of scientific evidence saying that doing heat training when you're not exercising does absolutely nothing for your body.
Okay.
You don't get any cyclists preparing for a hot Tour de France sitting in a sauna. You're doing simulated heat training where it's active rather than passive. So the science is constantly changing. Where some people swear by being in a sauna, it works. Some people think that it works for them, but it's probably more on feel rather than on scientific knowledge. Pre-Western States, I think I was the best heat. Yes, it wasn't a particularly hot year, still warm, but heat, in 10 days of heat training, you can get similar adaptations to what you would get for 3-4 weeks at altitude. And I think people are now heat training. Like I saw Hayden on Memorial Day weekend running in waterproof trousers and a waterproof jacket. You wouldn't have seen that 2-3 years ago.
Miserable.
So yeah, but people are cottoning onto it. Like I do. I've got my bike and my turbo trainer out here to prep for heat. Inside, I work closely with Green Tag, who are the core sensors on the side of our body, and working with a prototype device that is genuinely super accurate. And we've tested it with internal pills as well at the same time, and it's almost identical. And they've got a protocol that we use in the 10 days before the race, so you're ready for the heat. And I think if you can get things right, it's really interesting. And seeing people cooling themselves down with sort of ice bandanas and things is brilliant because it feels really good. But again, there is not so much scientific evidence suggesting that has a huge effect. Whereas seeing like consuming ice slushies, for example, is you can cool yourself. It's fairly miserable and you need to definitely train your stomach for it. Like it's a really nice feeling putting a ice bandana on, and if I raced and it was hot this year somewhere, I would still do it because it feels really nice, but it's probably not the bang for buck. It's not the most effective cooling strategy.
So you're saying that ingesting cold substances are more effective for cooling core temperature. Yes, but in the very sentence that you've said,
yeah, what we are trying to do is to reduce our core body temperature.
Right.
So having something really cold on our skin in a fairly small area, so it's the blood that's going from there that we're trying to cool down the blood to then send back in. It's such a small area compared to your whole body. Yeah. Whereas if we can ingest something really cold that actually goes into our core, you're going to cool things down.
Cool the core. All right. See, this is why we have Tom Evans on the podcast. So it's an education.
But when people talk about we need a lower core body temperature, but we're only going to cool our exo, like the outside of our body, it's like, well, why don't we try and cool internally as well? So yeah, I think the science is really coming on, and as people are willing to share these things, I think we're still, I say behind. I think we're sort of fairly level with what is fairly common with other endurance sports. But then I guess the further you go, the more you open doors for sort of the grey area within sport, which I think is who knows with cycling, I like to think it's very clean, but
yeah, they're moving faster than they ever have. But this is funny. Like, I actually wrote about it in our newsletter last week because obviously the Tour de France is just ending and I didn't get a chance to watch like any full stage, but I catch up on it every day. And the conversations that are happening in road cycling do mirror a lot of the conversations that are happening in trail running, this one included, about the super high carbohydrate intake that the cyclists are now on. And that's obviously very much driven by the big teams of sports scientists that all the World Tour all the World Tour teams employ. And obviously like the cooling vests are all over the place in cycling too. What about the super shoes? Because, thinking back, that Adidas shoe that you won Western States in last year, I see all over the place now. And 17 out of the top 20 finishers, like I said, evidently were wearing super shoes at Western States too. And I was always operating under the assumption that that wasn't really a thing in trail running.
Yeah, I think it's definitely making a difference, and probably making a difference more so at the top end of the sport rather than in the mid pack and at the back of the pack. And I guess it's similar with marathoning, and typically what happens in other sports, then trail running will follow 3-4 years later. And the people who, some people might cotton on to it a little bit early and have breakthrough performances and be able to hold that, like with fueling, for example. And that's, for me, I have fueled relatively high carb for my whole career, and it's always worked. And it's only now that it's sort of becoming a big thing. So, you should be fueling like 80 grams, 100 grams is the new 80 grams. It's like, well, yeah. What did you? Like,
what were you guys doing?
Yeah, I thought everyone was fueling properly, not just in racing but in training as well. So, yes, I think it's definitely making a difference. I don't think anyone. I think there's still, obviously with the terrain that we're running on, like, I think you almost need. There is no such thing as the perfect super shoe on the trails, because let's say what you want for the first half of Western States might be different for the second half of Western States, or what you want for the first half of UTMB might be different for the second half of UTMB. And actually, do you want the same shoe that you race Western States in is the same shoe that you race UTMB in?
That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, I guess like the higher the stack height, the more. Yeah, so basically it's all about the relationship between a really soft foam and then a stiffening element. The more foam you have, obviously the higher the shoe is, the more unstable it becomes. So for a race like Western States, it's not the end of the world, because there's a lot of it where you're running pretty flat out. Whereas at UTMB, when you're climbing up and then going down Pyramid to Calcaine before Courmayeur, actually having a super shoe there is probably going to slow you down, because it's unstable, it's dark, it's the only technical part of the race. But also for a race like UTMB, you're hiking for a lot of it, and you're not getting anything from a shoe like that when you're hiking, but it's helping you on the nice down. But I think you get a lot on the descent from Grand Col.
Yeah,
like you get a lot on that, especially on that second half when you're going through La Foulée. I think you're probably for the same effort, you're probably moving 5-6 seconds a kilometer quicker for the same effort.
Wow.
But they're fairly high risk. Like, I don't do much training in the super shoes. I do a lot of training in a shoe that's very similar it's a very similar shoe. The stack height is a little bit less, and it's got no stiffening element. But then for the race, I'll then wear, for a super shoe, and it's a very, very similar. I have an ever so slightly different one to the inline shoe, just in the construction of the upper. My feet are a bit weird, so I have a slightly different heel construction. So I guess like what companies are trying to do is to create this. People don't want to have a one-use shoe because environmentally it's really bad, and actually the process of when you have finished with a shoe, there isn't a lot you can do once it's past its life. And like, we work pretty closely with a charity in Kenya, and all of our used shoes we send out there when they're completely wrecked. But sadly, not that many Kenyans have got size 11 UK feet.
Yeah.
But better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's still just, it's only delaying its life cycle. It's still going to end up in landfill probably. So you don't want to, this is my Western States shoe. This is my UTMB shoe. Yeah. This is my Lavaredo shoe. This is my Ultra Trail Cape Town shoe. Yeah. Like, I guess you need to make a slight compromise with everything. And I think, for sustainability and for sort of environmental factors, I think, yes, you probably could get the best shoe for that one race, but you're probably going to need 2 pairs for one race, and then you've completely worn through it, which in my opinion is completely wrong.
Yeah. The reason I think it's interesting is, I mean, for the obvious reasons, like the equipment has advanced so much in my period of time being within the sport. And now if the super shoe revolution is coming into trail running, albeit in a delayed fashion compared to how it transformed road running, what does that look like? How does that impact the athlete dynamic? Because all of a sudden, like what happened in road running, athlete partnerships are then dictated by who's really making the best product or the shoe that will actually give me a competitive advantage. And right now, off the top of my head, it's Hoka and Adidas and Nike and, Speedland basically that are making the plated shoes. And so now everybody's going to have to fall in line and continue making good product.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think the really, on the final point, the really interesting thing is like prototype shoes have obviously been around for a while. And there is one brand in particular who have always made special shoes for each individual athlete that are never going to be commercially available. Whereas I think every other brand, what they're trying to do is test shoes with prototyping, let the athletes test them, build up some really cool buzz around them, call these shoes work. Like I wore we all wore the Adidas shoe was released last year. We all wore it the year before at UTMB. And it builds up the buzz and it's constantly changing, and then they sort of come out with the commercial model, and then everyone is genuinely in that. So I think everyone is now following a pretty similar pattern. I think there is going to be a huge increase in people wearing different shoes and prototype shoes at the end of this year and into next year. I think trail run, in my opinion, trail running is going to, post-Olympics, trail running is going to explode, and we're going to see lots of athletes from other sports coming across to trail running. Certainly in the first 2 years, pre-LA, and the big brands are going to follow suit as well, I think. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And incredibly exciting, because I think when some big brands take a step forward, then everyone else follows. And it sort of everyone is, because I think there definitely are some better shoes and some not so good shoes commercially available to athletes? And are you at a disadvantage if you sign with brand X instead of brand Y?
Yeah.
Like, is something going to make a difference? And I think it's a really interesting one. So I think as every brand starts to develop and trail running continues to grow, then the brands will continue to invest in creating what's right.
Yeah. But now, just to bring this full circle, they do have to consider, are we putting our athletes at a competitive disadvantage if we're not creating a high performance trail super shoe? The other brand I didn't mention was the North Face. So it's pretty much Hoka, the North Face, Nike, Adidas, and then Speedland, our little tiny operation making these plated shoes. So very interesting.
It's really cool to see. But I think there are far more brands that aren't currently commercially available that are wearing carbon plated shoes.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, well, we've spoken enough about kind of your coaching philosophy, what happened at Western States, the state of sports science and super shoes. Let's actually talk about your season, your career. We've established that UTMB is the main focus. It occupies 12 months of Tom Evans' life, and this macro cycle began counterintuitively with cross country. And as we begin to sort of point towards UTMB, let's start from that beginning, because you're really the only athlete in the world that races national level at cross country and who has a chance to win UTMB. So how does that set the foundation for the rest of the year?
I think, I guess I probably look at it like it's my equivalent of skiing. It's my equivalent of ski mountaineering. It's a different stimulus, but probably a little bit more specific. It's obviously running, but it's way more centered on intensity rather than volume. My typical week, I was probably only running 75, I say only, like probably 75 to 85 miles a week, but I was probably in 27, 30 shape for 10K, which for UTMB, there's absolutely no point being in that shape. But for me, it was just really what I wanted to do is, I think if you start trail running too early in the year, you leave yourself very tired. And like how much better I've been doing endurance sports. I've been doing endurance, maybe not just in sports, for 15 years. Like how much more efficient am I going to get by running? By not having like the real specificity that I need to have. So it's okay, well, what can we do slightly differently? Where can we sharpen up? And where can I have fun at the same time? And I think, for me, it was a really cool goal to qualify for the World Championships. And ended up racing the World Championships at Cross and finished top 50. And I think now post doping bans, I think I've moved up like 8 places, which is great. Wild state of affairs in normal athletics. It was a really cool and a really fun project that I did with Scott. And I guess it's reverse period. It's not reverse periodization. It's the closer you get to the main event, the more specific your training needs to be. And I remember years and years ago reading Coop's book that actually it was the case study on you with combining the distance and elevation gain and descent for Western States. I can't remember what year it was, maybe like 2015, 2016.
Yeah, 2014.
2014. And I remember reading that thing like, and like the closer you're getting to the race, the more you're getting it dialed in. So why would I, like 8 months before my main race, be training for my main race? I'm just going to be so tired and bored with the training. It was really fun to do that. And actually that cross country then fed into fed into a shorter trail race, shorter and faster bit of trail running. So, well, unfortunately, 2 weeks before the cross country world championships, I was in the gym doing a super light recovery session, and I had my first old man's injury, where I herniated a disc. So when people say, "Oh, my back's gone," I've always sort of said, "Oh, stop being pathetic." But when your back goes, your back goes. So
mine's been gone for 2 years, man. Yeah, I know the old man injuries.
Yeah, it was absolutely agony. So I was sort of rehabbing through it, and it was okay. So I raced Transvulcania. That was 7 weeks after sort of herniating this disc. And it was still pretty painful, but it was okay. Training was fine. It was just traveling that really annoyed it. So I was happy with my result there. Sort of joint second. I was really happy. A great step in the right direction. I was then supposed to race Zugspitz 80K.
Wait, hold on, time out, because I want to get there. But maybe sticking, because one thing I'd just like to reinforce here, I love how you describe cross country as your equivalent of ski mountaineering, because it is a totally different sport and a totally different racing experience. So maybe on cross country real quick, and then I want to have you share a few more words about Transvulcania. To me, with the cross country too, you're gaining experience competing against like a totally different cohort of athletes. In other words, the people that you see at Transvulcania are obviously not at the cross country world championships. And if there's a benefit there, like whether it's developing racing skills or just like habits or behaviors that maybe you observe from the cross country world that maybe rubs off on you in some way, because I think if you look at it like the equivalent to ski mountaineering for a lot of athletes, it's the same thing. You know, Remy Bonnet is competing against a totally different athlete in the wintertime than he is in the summer. Yeah.
So as of today, I've raced 13 times this year. So I have been able to practice my race day strategy 13 times. And get it dialed in. And yes, it's a little bit different for some things, but actually it's pretty similar. It's racing. But then when the gun goes off, everyone's trying to win. Or maybe not everyone's trying to win, but everyone's trying to do their best and run as quickly as they can. And being able to just race dynamics and race tactics and I'm not a very patient person, but this year I've been able to practice patience. And I think for a race like UTMB, patience a lot of the time works. Occasionally someone front runs the whole thing, but I think now the more competitive the race has got and the deeper the field has become, patience is a key skill, and something that I, without playing all of my cards too soon, is something that I will try and implement, but I probably get way too excited and drop a 5-minute mile. I think I've got absolutely zero interest in getting to Contamine or Courmayeur first this year. Whereas last year I was, ran like a bit of an idiot. But you make these mistakes and I've got to practice them all this year. So I think you're also racing against a couple of athletes who are my age, but typically I'm the oldest person in these races. So you're racing against younger, faster guys, who've probably got more talent than I do over a 10K. But in the UK, our cross country is wet, very muddy, hilly, not on golf courses, but around farmers' fields. It's really cool that I can sort of sit in on the faster bits, but then actually think, okay, we've got an uphill here. I'm going to hurt everyone else, and I'm really going to put a dig in and see what happens. And I guess, you get to practice these skills that actually, if you just raced a normal trail running season and what you race 4-5 times maybe. Let's say you make some fundamental mistakes in 3 of them. You'd have 2 that go perfectly. Well, you learn a lot, but you've only had 5 opportunities. So yeah, this is, I guess for me, has been a really cool start to the year and laid a really good, I guess, a different foundation, but a really good foundation nonetheless. Like, it's all on grass. It's all on grass. It's uneven. So there definitely are. It's way more similarities to trail running than road running.
Yeah, I mean,
you've got to be really strong.
The analog with ski mountaineering is perfect because there's so many trail runners who probably would love to do more ski mountaineering in the winter as a supplementary stimulus to their trail goals, but who don't live in a place where that's available. Whereas like for me in the Bay Area, there is a thriving cross country scene in the fall. And so maybe that's something that our listeners can maybe look into or implement in their own way. If ski mountaineering is impractical for you, whether because of geography or because of the expensiveness of the equipment now, maybe look into cross country as your version of off season.
You need almost nothing. And race entry costs like
$20.
If that. I think some of ours are like £8, which is like $10.
Cool. I'm gonna get back into cross this season. But Tom Evans orders. So then Transvulcania, like you said, you finished joint second with Dmitry Mityayev. You guys were just behind eventual champion Jonathan Albin. Share a little bit about that story, how you graded your performance there. Obviously, it was the start of your trail ultra season, the first like real dress rehearsal for UTMB. And what I'd also love to hear you talk about in addition to your own performance is Dmitry, right? Because he's one of these other athletes who I think, at least I view very similarly to you. Unfortunately, we don't have a shared language, so it's hard to know much about him. But if you follow him, it's like, okay, he's like really leaving no stone unturned and takes a really professional approach to his career. So maybe spend a few minutes on both those things, Transvulcania and your experience racing Dmitry.
Yeah, so Transvulcania was, I really wanted to do I've always wanted to do the race, but it's always fallen at a bad time. Like, I don't think it works very well for Western States build up. And then the year before, I was still getting back from injury. The year before that was COVID. And then they had it was in October rather than earlier in the year. So I'd really wanted to do it. And especially after the troubles that they've had with the volcanic eruption, I really wanted to go and show my support on the island. And yeah, it was more, for me, it was more than just a race. And I was under no illusions that I was going to have an amazing race. I'd done specific training, maybe 3 weeks. I think I'd done 2 3-hour long runs were my long runs going into it, and I'd done some uphill stuff, but I hadn't been on a training camp. I'd been in the UK. My longest descent is maybe 7 minutes, so doing a 2-hour descent is pretty different. So being able to hold my own with people who had done far more specific trail running training, I was really happy with. That was kind of a test to see, right, what has doing cross country running done, and what shape am I in as we start my trail running training for the year. Like, cross country world championships was the last weekend of March, and Transvulcania, I think, was beginning of May. So yeah, you chuck in a 5-day taper and a 5-day recovery after World Cross, and you don't leave yourself much time. And yeah, I think it was, and some people gave quite a bit of stick for finishing alongside someone else and holding hands across the finish line and sharing that. But for me, it's what the sport is, and actually it happens quite a lot. And if there's nothing to separate you after 7 hours of racing, there's nothing to separate you after 7 hours of racing.
Yeah.
And it's more, for me, trail running isn't necessarily about winning and losing. It's about, some of the people who gave stick say, trail running is all about community, don't worry about the elite runners. But then when the elite runners do something that they don't necessarily like, you get stick for it. And it's like, well, no, we're doing this for friendship and for more of the community rather than because all we want to do is win. So some people have got some things to work out and a bit of keyboard warriors, but you get that wherever you go, which is a bit sad. But
unfortunately,
I was super happy with the result, and I guess for us it sort of just laid a benchmark of, okay, this is where you are, brilliant. Let's learn from this and let's see where is the low hanging fruit, because like I said earlier, it's not what's the most amount of training I can possibly do, it's what's the least amount of work that I need to do to be able to put my best performance in at the end of August.
What about Dimitri? Do you know him well? Because like I said, I've only raced him once, and we actually had a really good battle at TDS in 2018, and I've always admired him ever since. And for our listeners, he's just a savage Russian athlete, also Adidas Terex. And I don't know, to me, I've always wanted to know more about him because we lack the shared language. I haven't been able to have him on the podcast and stuff like that. Do you have a sense of like what makes him special as an athlete? Is there anything particular about Dimitri that you respect?
Yeah, I think I probably respect most his work ethic. Like, I think he is, and also not just in running. Like, they have got an incredibly big coaching business, and between him and Ekaterina, they coach, I think it's like 450 athletes, which is wild. I think for him, he again sort of leaves no stone unturned with his training, and also finds a way to make it work. If there is, he identifies the areas where he needs to improve, and he works on those. I think where he has struggled previously is with nutrition in the long races. And I think he would be the first to admit that he's never got his battle at TDS with you was by far his best, I would sort of say, long race. Mm-hmm. Longer than a 100K race. But you look at his performance at Marathon de Mont Blanc this year, and he's definitely going to be going into UTMB as one of the favourites, definitely. But having said that, well, there are stats and similar with, no man has ever won Lavaredo UTMB in the same year, Marathon de Mont Blanc and UTMB in the same year, and Western States and UTMB in the same year. However, I have a feeling that this year there is probably a very good chance that one of those stats is going to be changed.
So for our listeners here, Jim Walmsley will be doing both Western States and UTMB, Dimitri doing Mont Blanc 90K, and UTMB, and Hannes Nomberger doing Lavaredo and UTMB. Very interesting. Killian did the Western States UTMB double in 2011, but of course, as usual, he is the anomaly in that respect. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about that. So then moving forward, when you originally posted your season and your schedule for 2024, after Transvulcania, I know you intended to race the European Off-Road Championships and then Zugspitz. Obviously, we'll get to Lavaredo here in a second. Ultimately, you pivoted and decided to do Lavaredo, and you had an awesome day there. But maybe speak a little bit about that decision. Why did you adjust the season mid-calendar?
Purely down to injury. My herniated disc was starting to play up. I also rolled my ankle pretty badly, so both of them were okay. If it was just one of them, it was probably okay. But with the combination of both of them, I was, by slightly hobbling on my ankle, I was making my back worse, and by my back being sore and leaning over a little bit was making my ankle worse. So I decided to pull the plug with both of them and just give myself a little bit more time to, rather than rushing into things, knowing that my main goals at the end of the season, or the end of August anyway. So yeah, decided to have made the smart decision, in my opinion, to pull out of those. And yeah, and then I was looking at what I could race and tried to get an entry into Marathon de Mont Blanc, but didn't get a reply. So I pivoted to Lavaredo, and I think I got in 10 days before the race.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, obviously I don't know. It's relatable. Everybody's got to change things up, based on the small little bumps in the road that we all confront. But I was personally curious about that. Lavaredo, you had an amazing battle with Hannes Namberger. You finished second, but I think you ran the third fastest time ever at Lavaredo. You were only 3.5 minutes back at the end. And to me, it feels like, wow, what a great dress rehearsal to have like a really competitive 120K, a really competitive 12 hours with one of the world's best, as the final check-in with yourself before what is your season's emphasis at UTMB. With Lavaredo, I'd love to hear you just, give the short version of the race report or whatever. But one thing that I talked to Rod Farvard about here on the pod recently that I thought was really interesting and that you might be able to expand on is like the official elastic braking moment. And with him and Jim at Western States, in his post-race blog that he wrote about it, he had this like interesting counterfactual or hypothetical of, what if I would have just hung with him for 30 seconds? Would he have like eased off the gas and we would have been able to maintain contact? So there was a video on your Instagram of you and Hannes together at 100K at Lavaredo. So like clearly you guys were running shoulder to shoulder. Like I said, it was only 3 minutes at the end. So tell us about that battle with Hannes, that official elastic braking moment, because I think those are the moments where none of us really get to watch or see what actually happens, that I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about.
Yeah. So the pivot happened, and then signed up to Lavaredo. I did 1 4-hour run in between Transvulcania and Lavaredo. So I guess instead of it being a dress rehearsal, it was okay, what shape am I in without being without going to the mountains at all? I've done some stuff I've done some uphill work on the treadmill. I've run pretty well at home, but I've not done the specificity. So for me, that was sort of okay, let's start getting specific. And again, let's just check in with myself. Where do I need to improve for UTMB? And I think Lavaredo was, I'd probably as competitive, if not more so. I'd probably say it was more so competitive than Marathon de Mont Blanc 90K. On going off ITRA or UTMB index, whatever it's called these days, I'm not really sure. Rankings, and for me, it was the perfect. Working with going back to being patient. One of my goals for the race was, I guess I approached this race a little bit differently. Rather than having, I did not have an outcome goal whatsoever. Like, I genuinely was in the headspace where I don't care if I win or I come fifth. My goals were, I guess my outcome goal was being able to write down a race debrief and know what I need to improve on for UTMB. That was what I wanted to do at the end of the race. So, and then I guess a lot of the process goals, well, one of the main process goals was don't don't go into an aid station first. Like, I did not want to be setting the pace at the front of the race for as long as possible. And the first aid station that I went into first was the final aid station, when I was half a second ahead of Hannes. So for me, that was a great, okay, let's just follow what people are doing and let's do that. And I get, for me, where I really struggled and where Hannes broke. The elastic snap on the final climb, where it was really steep, rocky, fairly technical. And at that point, sort of the penny dropped, was I just lacked the strength. Running uphill was fine. Where I lacked was the slow, steep power hike. But for me, how amazing is that? Yeah. I know. And that was the real light bulb moment of I could have stopped the race there and be like, cool, I've done everything I need. I know a lot of other things to work on as well. But I know where the low hanging fruit is. I know what I've not really done this year. And I think to be able to finish second, running a very respectable time, finishing second behind Hannes, who is the king of Lavaredo, and to be with him until 110 kilometers and to only finish 3 minutes behind him, having not done any real specific trail running training, knowing that I'm not at my best is really encouraging. And seeing I recovered really well after Lavaredo, and training since touchwood has been great. And I'm in completely different shape now to what I was at Lavaredo, which I think for me is really exciting because, like you say, I've put all of my eggs into one basket this year. I think it's very, very difficult to hold peak form for 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Whereas I think, and especially for a race like UTMB that's so long and it's so hard, it's through the night, it's really tiring. We might have the weather's going to be brutal either way. It's either going to be hot or it's going to rain. Yeah. Or both. Those are your options. So for me to be able to approach it fresh and genuinely excited is really exciting. Yeah. And actually enjoying I've now spent 4 weeks in the mountains since Lavaredo and a week before Lavaredo. And this will be my longest specific mountain block before a race. It's longer than I spent in Flagstaff before Western States, and following a similar sort of structure but with very different training. It leaves me very excited.
Awesome. Well, you've pretty much just answered this final question. I want to finish by talking about your new podcast, which I've just been binging and I love it. But so I'm sure the listeners would love to hear. Obviously, you just diagnosed that your one vulnerability at Lavaredo was just sort of the steep hiking. Obviously, that's going to be my
one of many. Well,
whatever. That was the deciding factor. Thing, yeah. So, I mean, you still ran 12 hours. You still ran the third fastest time ever at Lavaredo, a race with a storied history that many legends have competed in. So, you're going to be working on that. So maybe then the final question before we talk about the podcast a little bit is just, how do you get yourself in the mindset of a champion now? You're in teen, you're at altitude. Do you have because I know when you've gone there in the past, Scotty Hawker has been there too. Do you have a group of people that are all in UTMB mode? Paint the picture what the teen training camp is like and how you're getting yourself in the mindset of a champ.
Yeah, there's a really good group of both guys and girls here now. And I will definitely link up with them to do some sort of the more generalist training. I'll probably do my sessions on my own and my long runs on my own. I've been very fortunate that at UTMB, racing UTMB, I've only spent from Vallecine to the end on my own. I'm not very good, and same with Lavaredo. I spent the last 10 kilometers on my own. I want to be better on my own. And so that's something that, whether that will happen this year at UTMB, and I think going through the night at UTMB, I will definitely, and I think everyone knows it's far easier at night with someone else. And my bromance with Zach from 2 years ago was, was brilliant. I'll end up doing a lot on my own. But I guess this year is a bit different. My wife, Sophie, is going to be here fairly soon with our dog. So we sort of, made a bit of a home from home here that will be really nice. Typically my training camps have been me solo and going slightly stir crazy. So this will be really nice, sort of combining family and have some friends out here for a couple of days, sort of every 10 days. That will be really nice. And just enjoying it and doing the things that I know that I need to do. But I was in Chamonix last week and it was brilliant, but it was just, I love the trails there, but so do thousands of other people. We had one rainy day that was by far the best day because there was no one out on the trails. And I think when you're trying to do a really specific workout or really specific run, it's nice when it's not very busy. So for me, that's where Teen is brilliant. It's at altitude. I get to run through everything that I need to run, but in the safety and support from friends and family.
Yeah. Well, I think it's about 4 weeks to go. It's very much crunch time, which is what I mentioned to you before we hit record here. So obviously probably the most important couple weeks of training of your entire year coming up. And certainly a lot of us are going to be rooting for you there in Chamonix. So let's close by talking about the Ultrasound podcast. This is what originally motivated me to send you a note. Obviously, I always love having you on the show, but I think you've put out 4 or 5 episodes at this point. I listened to all of them over the last few days, and it's awesome stuff. I mean, you do such a good job of just sharing your journey. So maybe just say a few words. Maybe first just tell us about your co-host, Brett Saunders. Who is he? What's he meant to your career? How did the podcast come to be?
Well, firstly, thank you very much. And from one podcast host to another, it's not the easiest thing. And in my opinion, each episode gets better. The first ones, it's difficult to find your flow. It's a bit awkward, and we did it in a studio because we wanted it to have a really good feeling. So Brett and I started playing sports against each other probably when we were 6 or 7 years old. And so we sort of knew of each other from when we were teeny tiny. And then, since then, we then went to school together and played sport with each other. And, we're always very similar at school. And I think when a lot of people leave school and go off and do different things, you sort of slightly lose touch. And we lost touch a little bit, but whenever we would chat or meet up, and our parents only live 5 minutes away from each other, so whenever we'd meet up, it would be as if we'd never left. Brett got really into ultra running and running as sort of more so for mental health. And I started coaching him a couple of years ago. And so, he is a very, very amateur ultra runner who is a landscape gardener, a very normal person. He was the best man at our wedding. He's my best mate. He crewed me at Western States. He's part of that team. He helped last year at UTMB. He's coming out to UTMB again this year. So I guess he's been sort of instrumental in instrumental in that side, but then I guess in another way of, I know I'll never get too big for my boots because I'm not that sort of person, but if I ever did, he would be the first person to bring me back to reality. So yeah, it's been a really fun process doing this podcast, and I guess sort of the reason for doing it is I sort of saw a bit of a gap in the podcasting space where it's not two people who are hugely involved in trail running, and a lot of it just comes so organically from him just asking questions that he wants to know and what the general trail running community or just running community in general want to hear, and where I can help them. Like, and I guess it goes back to the coaching. Yes, I really like coaching. I really like helping people, but I'll only coach 10 people. So I can't help everyone. I can't reply to every Instagram message in the build up to a race because I'm not on social media. And so, yeah, it's been a really fun process. We have finished recording season 1. We'll do one more podcast in season 1 that will be the day after UTMB.
We should do it with a live audience. I'll be sitting in the front row.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Maybe we will. That'd actually be really cool. Yeah, and it doesn't matter how it goes. It's sharing, and I think the thing with trail running is there can only be one person in the men's race who stands at the top of the podium, and however much I would love that to be me, there's not an awful lot that I can do. You can't do anything to guarantee that because there are other people. So I'll just focus on what I'm going to do and try and give whoever else is there the best run for the money and see what happens. So yeah, the podcast has been really fun, and the more that we did it, the more that we enjoyed doing it and more confident we felt. And yeah, it's been really cool, and has definitely got season 2 coming out, and which will be fun, and we're slightly different vibe but very similar. But yeah, it's been really fun, and hopefully long may it continue.
Yeah, well, I think you're right in that it does occupy an unoccupied space in the podcasting landscape where it is just a front row seat to Tom Evans' career. And then by virtue of that, there's a lot of just really practical information that anybody can learn from by virtue of your ability to communicate that stuff and Brett's ability to draw it out of you. So again, it's really, really awesome stuff. And I would encourage our listeners to go check it out.
Kind. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe in closing here, this can be our final question, but obviously like a lot of what this podcast is a transparent look into your life, your career, your training, and everything that you've learned. And I think there is maybe a tension for an athlete of your caliber. I mean, oftentimes, the champion athletes don't want to be transparent, right? Like they want to protect the secret sauce or whatever. Anything you have thought about just like the value of transparent sharing of your journey and the ability to touch people as opposed to, keeping all these like hard-earned insights that you've, been able to learn yourself to sort of give yourself an advantage?
Yeah, I think the training that I do definitely wouldn't suit everyone. I don't know how many. Yeah, I don't know how many people, if even like I don't publish all of my training, but it's not rocket science. It's running at the end of the day. So I think it's for me, the important thing of being transparent is to give an insight into what it takes. And it's not like, I don't know how many, and it's not even something I've thought about. I don't know how many, if any, athletes that I will ever be in a race with listen to the podcast at all. And in my opinion, like, you can listen to the podcast, you can follow all of my training tips and do everything, but a race is a race, and yes, the training that you've done beforehand is a lot, but counts for a lot. But I think in a race like UTMB, the training only gets you so far. You can't learn desire through a podcast.
Good point.
And yeah, you've still got to do it. Like, just because you listen to my podcast when it's snowing at Grand Col Ferret and it's really cold and it's really miserable, just because I've said, oh yeah, I did this session. You've still got to go and do it. So no, for me, it's been really fun, and I always want to. I've learned so much from other platforms and trying to piece things together for what other people are doing, and even to the extent of watching the documentary that Jim did for UTMB, seeing that a small thing like he packs a spare t-shirt out of Courmayeur and then changes it at the first aid station because it's really hot in the Courmayeur Valley and he sweats loads before he then is on the really runnable part to Arnuva. And for me, that's like, why have I not thought of that? Like, that's so simple yet so clever at the same time. Is that just because I changed my t-shirt there, does that mean I'm going to be able to beat him? No. But I think people sharing what they're doing, like, we want the sport to get as good as we can. And I think by the athletes being transparent and sharing what they're doing, one, it gives a bit of personality, but then two, it helps just bring the sport along and people can see what they're doing. And I think the mid-packers who this sport is based around find it really interesting and think, oh, well, maybe I could implement that into my training. Because at the end of the day, it's just, we're all just trying to finish these races.
What a great example, that insight about Jim too. And it's so cool. I'm sure it's, not lost on our listeners here that, you two being at the pinnacle of the sport, there's still so much that you guys can learn from one another. Right. And you glean a little bit of what Jim does. And obviously now with the podcast and all the different ways that you share what you do, a lot of people benefit from that too. So a great closing sentiment. Tom Evans, good luck these last critical weeks of training. I can't wait to see you over there in Chamonix.
Dylan, thank you so much and take care and look forward to seeing you soon.